Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Beyond basic understanding and knowledge, one of the benefits of having done something for a long time, and I know long is subjective, is that it breeds an intense familiarity with a subject. In other words, you've seen almost everything there is to see. And this really helps. From my end, I might have a client ask about a specific situation, let's say with an associate contract, and I dig back into my mental database and remember how 5 other clients solved the very same problem, and I'm able to provide some assistance. And I'm sure if you've been practicing for a bit, you could think of similar experiences or examples from a clinical perspective. You also begin to see patterns if you've been doing something long enough. 80% of new clients have this problem, or this type of marketing makes a resurgence every 10 years, or things of that nature. And it's with these patterns in mind that I put together this week's episode. The patterns I'm referring to have to do with practice ownership. More specifically, the 4 biggest problems or mistakes we see that owner doctors make. And to be clear, I'm talking about mistakes made as business owners, not as doctors or anything else. And obviously, if I'm going to delve into the problem, I plan to provide solutions if you happen to find yourself in any one of these. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And as I start, I should mention that the one mistake that didn't make the short list was buying the wrong practice. I mean, look, I know that happens more often than you might think. But if this is you, let's say you bought a practice and it just was not what it looked like it was on paper when you bought it. There's not much else you can do other than make a go of it. Maybe you've got some headwinds, but you still have to make a go of it. And what I'm going to cover will help you with that in any event, even if you find yourself starting a little bit further behind the starting line than somebody who had a better luck with their purchase. So getting into these mistakes, what's mistake number 1? The biggest mistake we see is not having a competent office manager. Now, I'm not going to get into all the specifics of what an office manager does. We have episodes on that, what an office manager does, day-to-day office manager duties, part 1 and part 2. We have tons of blog content on this, video content on this. But ultimately, why have an office manager? Well, if you're an owner doctor and the majority of your time is spent chairside, then let's say that's 80% or 90% of the time you're in the practice. Well, then who's running your business? Not just making sure it's not burning down or patients aren't upset, but who's running your business while you're working on a patient? If you don't have an office manager, that would be nobody. It is impossible if you were a productive chairside clinician to run your own practice. I've seen lots of workarounds for this. And, I'm not saying you can't be semi-successful, but if you look at the really successful practices, I'm talking about the super productive practices, they have one thing in common, maybe they have more than one thing in common, and one of those is a killer office manager. This is the person running your business. It's almost like, not on paper a partner, but it's the partner in your business. It's the person you're working with. It's the management team, you and your office manager. This is the person making things happen. And you either don't, if someone doesn't have one, that's one thing. But also I've seen it where someone has one in name only. They're the office manager, but they're not very good at it. They're not fit for the job, or they're just not the best manager. They're not competent, so to speak. And you got to be careful in this regard because especially if you put somebody new on the job, you have to show them some degree of grace. They may need some training. They may need some apprenticeship. In a lot of cases, the problem is the doctors put the office manager on the job and said, you're the office manager, and the doctor doesn't even know what an office manager is really supposed to do. And then you run into all types of problems in that regard because then they don't know what their expectations are, or they're not meeting these imaginary expectations that you've never made clear. So it's important that you get somebody, they understand what the job is, why they're doing it, what their overall expected end result or outcome is supposed to be. I would also recommend getting your office manager trained. And by trained, I don't mean on the basics of dentistry. I mean as an executive. This is the type of thing we do on the MGE Power Program. This is my shameless plug, not a shameless pug for the episode, folks. But you want to have your manager trained, and believe it or not, you need to be trained as well as the doctor owner, because whether you like it or not, you are an executive by default because you own a business. So if the first thing I would expect from an owner doctor, beyond having a practice and having patients, but as an executive, the first thing I would expect from that owner doctor is a competent manager. That's your job. That's what you're supposed to make, is a competent manager. Well, if you don't know what one's supposed to do or how to run this manager, you're going to have trouble. So ideal scene, you and your manager are both thoroughly trained. Again, you can check out the MGE Power Program if you want to find out more information about that. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. But ultimately, that's one of the key components, because you just don't have the bandwidth or physically the time. Even if you're an amazing executive, if you are chairside with patients, you are not going to be able to run your practice. And if you have somebody up front who's wobbly or not very functional, they're not really somebody who's stable or productive, or someone who really isn't watching the store, so to speak, it's constantly going to flash back on you, and this is what you're going to be handling after hours, and it's going to be a massive source of stress. So that's usually the biggest mistake that we see. First off, right there, is trying to run the practice without a manager. It does not work. And look, even if you weren't chairside, let's say, I don't know, you have some associates and you're doing a lot of the case presentations or something like this, I still would tell you to get a manager. Because if you had gotten to the point where you're not chairside, I wouldn't want to then plug you into managing the business, even just from a dollars and cents perspective. If you're that productive of a doctor and you've been able to build this big practice, your value per hour to the business is a lot higher than I'm ever going to pay a manager, even a really super expensive manager. So first mistake, no manager. The key here is get a manager. As far as finding the right one, how do you know you have the right one? We have a lot of content on that. You can check the podcast. You can check our YouTube channel. You can check our blog. Or if you have questions, you can always email me directly, jeffb@mgeonline.com, or contact us, and we can help you with something like that. All right, so that's mistake number one. What's number two? I try to figure out the best way to say this, but it's basically being indecisive or rationalizing a bad situation. And you'll see this manifest in any number of ways. So let's say you have a non-productive employee and you've done whatever you would normally do, because this is, again, always a tough spot. What should you do to get this employee productive? Well, look, there's, and we see this with clients. They'll come in and they'll go, I'm not training my staff enough. After they learn how important staff training is, I've never trained very well. So they start spending more time training employees that in the past they would have just gotten rid of. Well, in certain cases, the person has redeemable qualities and they're worth being trained. In other cases, I would not advise training the person because they're just non-productive. Training is a reward, okay? That's the first thing to think with, okay? But if someone's not performing, there has to be a sort of, what you would consider to be the usual steps you would take. So if, let's say, let's just take a little bit of a different example here. Let's say I hire somebody to do patient reactivation, and I'm doing that as sort of a stepping stone onto other jobs in the business. So I start them off on patient reactivation, and the average person I put on the phone will schedule 10 patients a day. Some do 8, some do 12, but the average is like 10. So I bring in somebody else, and as this person gets promoted, and this next person schedules 20. They're a superstar. Okay, great. Then I definitely want to keep that person. Then I bring in somebody else, and they schedule 1 or 2 or something like this. And I gave them the same training that I gave the superstar and the person, or the people rather, who'd been scheduling 10. Well, at that point, I have to look at, I have a certain amount of time, a certain amount of resources. I'm just not in a position where I can continue to invest training in this person. They're obviously not going to make the cut. So you have to have sort of what you consider to be usual steps that you take in order to bring somebody up to snuff in your business. Are they the best? Are they the best onboarding procedures that ever were in existence? Probably not, but at least they work for you. Okay, they work for you. So you have to be able to look at an employee and go, okay, is this going to work? Should I invest more time? Should we correct this? Or is there a point where I just have to go, look, I need to move on? But this is the big mistake I see gets made. And I've told our clients this for years. The bigger problem is not hiring the wrong person, it's keeping them. A person will start to rationalize why it's okay that this non-performing employee is still there, whether it's a manager or a receptionist or a hygienist, it really doesn't matter. But they're not reacting, I'm trying to think of the best word, like any other employee would react in that same situation. The average person. You've done training steps A, B, and C, and they just don't seem to it doesn't make them any better. Whereas the average person improves when you do that. Well, you need to move on. But this is where people get themselves in trouble. They continue to try working on it, continue to try working on it, and it's just not going anywhere. Maybe I just need to spend a little bit more time with this person. They're rationalizing non-performance. They're rationalizing a bad situation. And it doesn't necessarily have to just apply with employees. You could have marketing that just isn't working. And again, I have to be clear here, How would I know my marketing isn't working? It's getting me no response. And that's assuming it's actually going out. I've seen people say their pay-per-click isn't working, and then when they dig in, they find out it's actually just not happening. Things like this. But my marketing's not working. It's just an ineffective marketing campaign, but I'm just going to keep doing it because, I just got to keep doing it. People do this, or low productivity. Oh, well, it's this time of the year. It was just Christmas. It was just tax season. It's summertime. This is why people don't show up. This is rationalizing a bad situation as opposed to digging in and figuring out why is this bad situation happening. If your collections are not workable, meaning that they aren't enough to actually pay your bills, you could sit here and blame everything else. Well, it's the economy, it's this, it's that, it's everything else. Or look at, well, why is my practice not producing enough in order to pay the bills or collecting enough in order to pay the bills? Because there's a reason for that. There is a reason for that. I've given this example all the time at seminars. You can almost see people say it in unison. I'll ask, well, why don't patients pay their bills in December or January or not want to spend money? Oh, well, Christmas or the holidays. How about April, tax season? Why do patients miss appointments during the summertime? They're on vacation. And you see across the room people from offices all over the United States and Canada in unison almost giving me these answers. I didn't feed them these answers. This is sort of the acceptable justifications for non-production. So, but I've seen offices that have highest ever statistics in January, highest ever statistics in April, and full schedules in June, July, August, and September. So it's not the real reason behind it, but it's very easy to come up with a quick excuse to explain it. So you get yourself in trouble when you look at a bad situation, and rather than digging into why is this situation so bad, why are the collections down, why is my marketing not working, why are no new patients being scheduled, why are new patients no showing all the time, rather than finding out what's really behind it, people just rationalize it. So that is the death knell of an executive. I would definitely recommend, if you're doing that, to stop that, but that is one of the bigger mistakes I see, especially with newer clients. Which brings us to number 3, which is lack of financial oversight. So this is usually, more often than not, due to a lack of understanding of finance. Some people just don't like the subject. They hate numbers. Finance is also, it seems, this is just my opinion, has been made intentionally somewhat opaque so that it seems like it's hard to understand when in fact it's actually not. So if you own a business, you have to be able to evaluate your finances. And let me give you sort of an operating procedure for this. And this is something you could apply to any aspect of your business. So let's say I own a business and I want to do a marketing campaign. Does that mean I have to become a professional at Google pay-per-click and Facebook paid ads and implant funnels? Like I have to become a pro to the point where I could create those things myself? Absolutely not. I can hire someone to create them. But I still have a responsibility for this. I've outsourced it, so to speak, but I still have a responsibility in the sense that if I hire someone to do pay-per-click, I have to have enough working knowledge to be able to monitor their productivity, just like I would do with an employee, to see if it is working or it is not working. Otherwise, I can get snookered very easily. I hire somebody to do pay-per-click, I'm spending money out the nose, and I'm getting no new patients. Well, I should be able to look. I have basic metrics I'm looking at. Okay, we had this many phone calls and this many conversions, so that I can actually see where the problem's coming from. Is it coming from the ads? They're not getting any clicks. Or is the problem coming from in the office where my receptionist is just not converting any of these calls? You see, I have to have enough working knowledge in order to be able to manage it. It does not mean that I have to know how to do it. The same thing applies with your finances. The same thing applies. I have to have enough basic understanding of my finances so that I can read a P&L and understand what it means. I have to know what my overhead is. I have to know what's a good investment for my practice and what's a bad one, what's a good financial decision and what's a bad one. I have to be able to make these decisions. And part of it has to do with how people view ownership overall or in the first place. So, there's 2 basic views you could take. So you own a practice, you own a business. So you could look at it and go, well, I'm responsible because it's my business. I'm on the hook for everything. If somebody screws something up, ultimately it's my name that's going to be dragged through the mud, right? That's one way of looking at it. Or you could look at it from the perspective of I'm a business owner, and just like any other job in the business, office manager, doctor, dental hygienist, dental assistant, each of these jobs have a specific required outcome. So if I have a schedule coordinator, What would I expect this person to create? They would create a full, efficiently booked, productive schedule, that runs more or less on time. That would be what they make for me. And in exchange for that, they're a member of the team and they get paid. Well, you have the same thing as an owner. An owner has a specific outcome that they're supposed to be creating, a healthy, profitable, expanding business. So sure, you're responsible, but if you take it more from the viewpoint of I'm an owner and this is what I'm supposed to make, it gives you a little bit of a different viewpoint on how you're doing your job. Because one way to look at I'm responsible is, this is drag, I hate the numbers are boring. No, your job is to make an expanding, healthy, profitable organization. So in order to do that, you have to make sure that the finances are being run intelligently. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in trouble financially, or you're going to overspend in an area, or you're going to spend money on things that you don't actually need. So it's part of your job, in other words. It's part of the job. Just like you have a job as a doctor to create a healthy patient or a well-done procedure, done at a high level of clinical excellence that meets the standard of care, well, you have a job as an owner, and that's your job, to create a profitable, expanding, healthy organization. All right, which brings us to mistake number 4 that we see, which is not enough attention to the numbers. And by numbers, I don't mean the financial numbers. I mean, that's one thing we just talked about. But the productivity numbers, the metrics, the KPIs, whatever you want to call them, which tell you how healthy your practice is. It's in line with what we're just talking about here. So if I'm running a practice or I own a business, I have to make sure that I'm seeing, how are things going in this business? It's just like driving a car. If you drive a car, you have instrumentation. You have your oil pressure, and you have your, the oil temperature rather. You have your speedometer. You have your gas gauge. You have different gauges, your RPMs. They tell you what's happening in your car. If you run your RPMs too high, then you start to redline, right? And then you could potentially mess up your engine, although a lot of cars now will just shut you down. Not like the old days. But the point being is these instruments, these indicators tell you when something's going well, bad, or it's acceptable. The same thing applies to statistics. So I have to have statistics, number one, which are actually measuring my key metrics, things like production, collection, treatment plans presented, treatment plans accepted, things like that, right? And I have a list of 14 statistics that we recommend clients keep. If you want a copy of it, I'll put it as a download here on the episode webpage. It's completely free. You can download it and explain what these statistics mean and how to keep them and things like this. But I have to also be looking at these metrics on a routine basis and performing oversight, and that routine basis has to be at a decent interval so that things don't go completely out of control. And it sounded really complex, but let me explain it in a better way. How often do you look at your gas gauge when you go out? You probably look at it depending on how much you're driving at a certain frequency. If you drive a lot, you might look at it every day. If you drive very little, 2 miles to work every day, you might look at it every couple days, you see? The same thing applies to practice statistics. How frequently should you be looking at things to make sure that you catch things before they go really wrong? And usually what we recommend to clients is at least weekly. You might look at some daily. When you have your morning meeting, you might look at where are you at for the month to date, and how does that apply to the week that you're in, and because you maybe figured out what your monthly goal was, how are you tracking with the monthly goal? Because when you don't do that, what ends up happening otherwise is, let's say you have a monthly collections goal of 200,000, and you don't look at the numbers until the 23rd, and then you realize you're at 50. And you're now in big trouble. Had you looked at those numbers on the 5th and the 6th, or maybe the 10th, you would have realized you had a problem long before it became unrecoverable. So there has to be enough frequency of monitoring these metrics in order to make sure that you can do something about them before they completely spin out of control and become a disaster. And to that end, I'd also recommend some form of regular oversight or meetings. If you have your office manager, you should minimally be getting together weekly and looking at statistics together. What areas are performing, what areas are underperforming that actually need some attention and work. And if you do this, you can catch on pretty quickly to problems before they go completely out of control. I mean, you could apply this to dentistry. If you saw me when I just had a little pit, I only need a filling. If you didn't examine my teeth frequently enough, or if I didn't show up, that pit will eventually become a nice sized cavity, which will then go from being a filling to maybe an inlay, then an onlay, then a crown, and then maybe possibly a root canal, or ultimately an extraction. Or something. The point being is, if you look at it frequently enough, you should be able to keep an eye on these things. So I would look at certain big metrics daily when you meet in the morning. I would minimally be going over the key statistics for your practice weekly. I have an example of those statistics you can download for free on the episode webpage. Which brings us to, those are the 4. I mentioned there were 4. There's actually a bonus one. I'm going to give you a 5th. This is what happens when you record the episode and you were supposed to say 5 instead of 4. No, I'm just kidding. This actually, I had this on my sheet here. As far as the 5th issue, it's sort of like a bonus one, and it doesn't happen with everybody. So the 5th one is, this 5th issue is a lack of introspection, a lack of being able to look at oneself and realize when there are certain things that you need to handle. So you run this business, right? And you may have people who are non-performers that you've had to get rid of or hopefully correct and they've turned around. Well, there may be cases where you're the one who's not performing. That may happen, you see. There may be a lack of oversight. You may not have put a manager on the job. You may procrastinate a lot or not make decisions. You may be practicing some bad leadership practices, meaning you're not holding yourself to the same standard or account that you hold the other staff to. You get mad at them when they're late, but you're late all the time. Maybe you're having trouble with case acceptance, or maybe you had this marketing campaign that was just this pet idea of yours and you did it and it's not working, but because you made the decision, you keep doing it. So I'll see this happen from time to time with doctors or any business owner is they won't just look at this and go, oh, I messed up. They just have to continue it because, they're obviously right because they own the business. And I say take the opposite tack, which is rather than justifying it, be able to look at it and go, wow, I need to learn how to fix this, or I need to learn how to do this. Like, let's say your case acceptance is just not very good. Well, you could come up with all kinds of reasons. Oh, the patients in my area just don't make very good money. They don't care about their teeth. No one's getting approved. Or you could look at it and go, maybe there's something I need to change in order to improve my case acceptance. That's usually very tough for people to do, but it takes a big person to do it. And it's sort of a requirement if you want to be a high performer. And a lot of doctors will do this clinically. If you're having trouble with a specific clinical procedure or whatever, you realize, oh, I need to learn about that, or I don't feel comfortable doing that. Well, why not apply that same standard to the other hats that you wear of business owner, and you're actually a salesperson too if you're presenting treatment. If you're not performing as an owner or not performing as a salesperson, well, handle it the same way you'd handle it if you were not performing as a doctor. What would you do? You'd go get some CE, you'd talk to your mentor, you'd do something. You wouldn't just perpetuate not performing in a certain area or blame the patient for having, teeth that are hard to work on. You wouldn't do that. You would learn how to fix it. So the same thing applies as an owner or a salesperson, okay? It's very easy to blame other things, but unfortunately it doesn't lead to the solution. So those are the top issues that I see. And like I said, buying the wrong practice wasn't included in there. It does happen from time to time. But those are the top 5 things you'll see. And they manifest in many different ways, but it will devolve to those basic 5 reasons. And the cool thing about this, if there's anything cool, is that any of these things are easily remedied if you're willing to put in the time and the effort. And believe in my view, if I'm having trouble in a particular area, let's take an example. Let's say I'm not very good at case or treatment presentations or treatment acceptance. Let's say I maybe close 20% of the patients I see. I'm presenting $200,000, $300,000 worth of treatment a month, and I'm closing 40 or 50. If I could, fix that and get it up to 50%, that would be huge for my practice. It would also be huge for my patients. Because the patients need this treatment validly. It's what's actually best for them. If I knew how to communicate it to them in a way that they actually wanted it, they would do it. So it really is a win-win for everybody. The practice wins, you win, there's more career fulfillment, and your patients win. They get healthier. So it's one of these things where investing a little bit of time at the front end is worth it, and it pays dividends down the road because it's not like anybody can take that knowledge or ability to sell away from you. And that applies to any skill that you learn with relation to managing your business. So with relation to your career, this is your career. In the long run, it's completely worth it. And that's why we do things like the MGE Power Program. I put a link to it on the episode webpage. Or if there's any other areas, we pretty much cover every aspect of practice management. These are things that we can actually help you with. There's my second quasi-shameless plug there relating to my earlier one. Anyway, folks, I hope this helps. These are these 5 big mistakes. If you have any questions, there were other ones that didn't make the list. You can reach out to me directly at jeffb@mgeonline.com. You can also find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.